This is yet again, you know, we've just seen from a parent of a transitioner, and now we're going to listen to the adult child of a transitioner. Emma Thomas, I believe, is you know, a very powerful presence. Sometimes I think under recognized, under acknowledged, and her website should be checked out, childrenoftransitioners.org. I think they are the last group to really speak out. I too, like Lynn, look forward to the sunlit uplands when all the detransitioners are multimillionaires. But also I look forward to the day when the experience of children of transitioners is recognised, because I think it's a very under-acknowledged cohort, and Emma is bravely giving voice to this issue. So welcome, Emma.
Okay, thank you. I'm guilty of some overambitious PowerPointing, so I'm going to whiz through some things, and if you want to look at them later, just ask me. In 2019, I started a website because I just noticed there wasn't anything for children of trans people, and I think the most I expected from it was some catharsis. You know, I was going to, you know, tell my truth after nearly 40 years. But what I really found was friendship. And we turned that into political action. We turned that into campaigning and doing things. And I urge everyone to do that, because it's been so valuable to me to have that experience of meeting other people and working together. Most of the people who contribute to COTS, children of transitioners, are the daughters of late-stage male transitioners or to gynophiles. And I'm speaking from that perspective. Over time, I think we'll see more children of women who identify as trans-speaking. You may have seen recently online a woman who died from complications from taking testosterone. She left 2 young children. At the moment, it's more those with similar experiences to mine who are old enough to speak, but expect different perspectives as we move through different stages of this social phenomenon. I was 11 when my father announced that he was a transsexual. He told me he had a woman's brain and a man's body. My parents were divorced, my mum was too ill to look after me, and I lived with him from then until I was 18 in 1989. My dad went through the traditional transsexual process, hormones, electrolysis, and surgery, including post-surgical problems, his urethra closed up. I watched my father grow breasts. We spent a lot of time in gay pubs because those are the places that would accept a transsexual and a teenage daughter. All the teachers at my school knew about my father, but I kept everything a secret from other kids. My father changed my surname, so I didn't have a continuity with my old life. Our language changed. Even before the internet made this easy, we lived in a bubble of queer culture, alienated and isolated, not unlike a cult, to be honest. It was us against the world. Oh. Wrong way around. Okay, so a lot of other transsexuals visited us and stayed during that time, often through SHAFT, the Self-Help Association for Transsexuals. Here's one of their newsletters, and there was other material for cross-dressers I saw with sissy fetish porn. Those pictures were disturbing, and it's worth taking a moment to think what messages a daughter receives about what being a girl is. One particular perspective I have to offer is spending a lot of time around transsexuals as a kid and listening to them talk, mostly about themselves and mostly about clothes. It was, for my father and his friends, being a woman was about being attractive to men. A man looks at you and feels desire. Beyond that, you have no purpose. For example, the recent revelation that transsexual icon Jan Morris wouldn't pay for his daughter to have the same education as his sons because he thought that women shouldn't be more than secretaries. This is me at 16. I had an eating disorder, and my father told me that I was already a failure as a woman because I was too fat to be attractive. It was as if the father I had, who I loved so much, had just gone, replaced by a new person who was cruel and judgmental. He told me that the life we'd had before, when he was simply my dad, had all been a lie, and all that time he was miserable. Now his love was conditional on my compliance and my silence. He was controlling. There was a huge amount of emotional blackmail involved. My father portrayed himself as a victim, of his parents, of my mother, of society, of his employer, and of me. I couldn't let him down, and I couldn't let down transsexuals in general who needed me to be their cheerleader. Of course, I had no idea that this was an unfair burden on me. I didn't know any different. This was my normal. The paradox of what my father was saying to me was that if it was innate, as he claimed, then he'd married my mother and had me, while all along knowing that this was there. And doesn't that make it worse? I seemed to lurch between grief and anger. Grief for my dad, who used to lift me on his shoulders, and anger for myself and my mother, who he put through so much. This sense of ambiguous loss is something I hear a lot from those with similar experiences, even those who are still supporting their fathers. How can you find the words to articulate your trauma? Research suggests that there is less of a sense of grief if fathers transition while children are very young. The cynic in me would say that's because you have no better time to compare it to. One reason I'm skeptical is because of all the stories we hear from women about male partners announcing they are trans while she is pregnant or not long after giving birth. Whether they stay together or not, the consequence for the child, of course, is to be born into a difficult and stressful situation. Recently, my mother told me that my dad started cross-dressing in and outside the house not long after I was born. I always had a sense when I was a child that something was being withheld from me, that something was wrong. Even our neighbours treated us with wariness. Friends never came to play at our house. This feeling of unease has followed me throughout my life. There we go. It's common to find children used as narcissistic props, a lot of boasting about being a trans mom. I validated my father as a successful transsexual. Most of the transsexuals he knew had lost access to their children. The words mom and mother are powerful symbols for the trans father. My own father pretty much lost interest in me at 18 because I wasn't much use in validating his fantasy. One thing I notice is how the child's mother has to be erased in order for the dad to become mom. This might be physical or emotional exile and alienation, often helped by taking the term mom away from her. My father's a fantasist, and his narratives about his past and his own identity just seem very fluid. He used to lie and tell people he had polio as a child, for example. I think he liked people to see him as a victim. He toyed with becoming a Muslim, a witch, and opted more recently for a Jewish identity. He's changed his name a couple of times, which speaks of his need to chase the high from his own transformation narrative. I think as autogynephile culture has developed, you are seeing a lot of shared fantasy, new identities, made-up names. You see more anime, more fantasy, more cosplay becoming a factor. There's a detachment from reality. We see it all over the internet, but I think a lot of autogynephiles are particularly vulnerable to it, an intersection of different delusions. This is attractive to children, of course, who don't understand the sexual nature of the game. Stephanie, you might be familiar with, the father in the centre, left a wife and 7 children to pursue a fantasy of being a little girl. His daughter invited him in 2012 to her wedding on the proviso that he just dialed it down, kept it to himself, and dressed like her dad. But instead, he made a very public suicide attempt on her big day. You keep hoping that your dad can escape the delusion and come back to you, even just for one day, but he's in too deep. And here's probably the most famous trans parent of all, and he has a story to tell.
One daughter was stealing the other daughter's clothes. Okay, so she set her computer up in the room, and she put on that like security device so that if anybody walked in, it would videotape them. Okay? I didn't know that, okay? So everybody's gone. I got like 3 or 4 hours. Let's try on a few things here. And I come, and all of a sudden the kids come home, and I hear this big commotion going on in the other room. And Chris goes, here. Yeah, sometimes. I was very stealthy. I honestly, I went all these years. I mean, I would go to hotels, cross-dress, this and that, and never get caught. I'm proud of that, okay?
Sorry, the sound is awful, but I didn't want to just paraphrase. I wanted you to see the glee and also hear the laughter from the appreciative audience. It's in his autobiography as well. He says he's trying on clothes in his daughter's room because she is the only person in the house with a full-length mirror. I don't believe him, and the audience shouldn't either. It's a huge boundary violation, and he's not only gleefully admitting it on camera, but he expects us to see how much he got away with it. His daughter was 10 years old, and she caught her father cross-dressing in her bedroom. Is this kind of behaviour social workers and therapists have to address in families? You can see the challenge if the outside world claps and applauds it.
One daughter's was feeling.
Christine Benvenuto's book, Sex Changes, about what happens to a family when a husband transitions, includes disturbing details about dressing up sessions she discovers he has been having with her distressed young daughter. Girls can feel pressured into participating in their father's fantasies about being a teenage girl. The girl herself feels the scrutiny, losing privacy and dignity. He may behave this way around her friends as well. Boundary violations can happen in lots of different ways, not just physical abuse. I think some of you have seen this one.
2 black floral dresses. We got these from our den, and we absolutely love them. We've worn them together so many times already. We've had them for quite a while, so we definitely have gotten lots of use out of them. We get lots of compliments from people when we wear these out in public. So we really enjoy this outfit. For our second combination, it doesn't actually match color, but the styles are exactly the same. These are cold shoulder dresses. They are short dresses. They have the buttons in the front and they're kind of ruffled. You can see the ruffling better on these than you can on mine. But one other cool feature you can tell right here, we have pockets in these dresses. For our third matching dresses we want to show you today are these long spaghetti strap dresses. We got these ones from our den as well, and we love how they flow. They're soft material. They have these little floral patterns all over. So for our fourth and final combination, this is the most elegant combination we have. Can't say it's the most favorite one, but they are gorgeous dresses. These teal colored dresses with the frilly shoulders and the tie strings in the front. I like this dress. However, they are not easy for us to get on and off.
I want to say something.
You want to say something? Go ahead.
And I don't really like this dress, but it's cute. But I don't fit it that well.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't fit you the greatest.
And
But
it's just hard to get on and off. So.
Yeah, well, we struggled to get it on you today anyways, so, and it's going to be a struggle to get it off.
Stop it, thank you. When I was in my early teens, my father and I had a day trip to London wearing the same outfits. So this is familiar. We shopped for clothes together. The daughter in this video is clearly trying so hard to please her father. Isn't she lovely? Lovely girl. Despite the obvious discomfort at wearing clothes that don't flatter her. It's easy to exploit our nature, our desire to make our dads happy. At one point, Caitlyn Jenner's daughter catches him cross-dressing in the garage. Maybe he'd got a full-length mirror there, and says he's dressed as his true self. It's this way that we rationalise fetish cross-dressing when we don't understand it. Even when we're older, for a lot of us, it's easier to be in denial of the sexual nature of what he's doing.
2 black
Oh, no, right. One interesting thing is how often children of trans people themselves are somehow trans or non-binary. From my own experience, when one parent or both loses their grip on material reality, your own identity can be similarly weakened. There's grooming involved. To me, when boys and girls play dress up, it's innocent. I don't think it's something that should be recorded. But what significance does it hold for a cross-dressing father? With boys, is there perhaps some investment in the idea that his son is like him? And what affirmation does a child get for wearing these clothes, remembering how important clothing is for autogynephiles? AGPs are so invested in the idea that this is innate, that they encourage the idea of child transition, and this extends to their own children. They're definitely examples of father and son autogynephilia. 20 years ago, professionals would have found much more support in challenging these behaviours in fathers. Now, not so much. I don't really know a lot right now about particular experience of sons of AGPs. I've read some brief accounts and they express how it's difficult to be approaching manhood around a man who's running away from it. Milestones are awkward. Does a son feel that he needs to show that he's like his father? What messages does he absorb? But back to girls for a moment. This is probably the worst example of a destabilized identity I could find for a child of a transitioner. There are lots of profiles out there of trans families where the kids say they are non-binary and trans, possibly just to compete for attention. But this is something devastating, isn't it? More permanent. 14 years old. She wrote to Reddit asking for moral support and getting a double mastectomy because she had doubts. When they'd finished with her, there weren't any doubts. What role did having a trans father play in this happening? Let's take a moment. This is the heavy text bit. If you are the child of a transitioner, it's worked out for you, then I am happy for you. The awful truth, however, that these worst case scenarios exist. All of these stories are trans fathers and stepfathers. Increasingly, it seems that the more organisations have been captured by trans ideology, the fewer places children have to go for help. Of course, sexual abuse happens in all kinds of families. My concern is that when the abuser is trans, professionals are hampered by the organisational capture, by an ideology that wants you to ignore the red flags. I want the same scrutiny in all cases. And I am saying that fetish cross-dressing is sexual, and professionals were aware of that for decades, until suddenly they weren't. The amnesia that has crept upon organisations over the last decade, aided by a host of trans advocates such as Stonewall, fails children of transitioners. Narcissism, personality disorder. There isn't a place for you as a child, as a person with needs and agency in that dynamic. And there is a consequence for many of us in not complying. There is a narcissistic rage that many trans-identified men show, particularly to women, when we don't cooperate. They are enabled by activists, and I believe that for some young people, the sheer force of hate we see in public is mirrored at home. This poor young woman received a huge amount of hate online for just this post. She expected sympathy, but really the activist just carried on her father's abuse. And here's the anger directed at Maya Forstarter and ourselves after she retweeted an article we wrote called How to Help Children of Transitioners. Nothing like being called Nazi turf scum for talking about your experiences. So if we aren't public, if we don't speak out, there are good reasons. When we look at research, some papers dating back decades, the picture seems rosy. Children are doing great, doing really well in school, adjusting fine. Teachers report no problems with attainment. There's some slight uptick in eating disorders in girls. And yet, I keep engaging with all these trans widows and children of transitioners, and the same patterns of being victims of narcissistic behaviour occur again and again. Trans widows tell me their children are traumatised. They refuse to leave their rooms and won't go to school. Children of trans-identified fathers talk about narcissistic abuse, about cruelty and neglect. Of course, the people who've had a bad experience are going to contact me. I think we need to see the bigger picture. I still haven't come across a peer-reviewed paper that talks to people like me and my mother. Some research is even clearly intended to help trans-identified fathers in custody disputes. Where is the balance? It reminds me of the way the affirmation industry insists that regret rates are close to zero and hardly anyone detransitions. And yet there the detransitioners are. We can see them ourselves, we meet them ourselves, but they simultaneously don't officially exist. Uta Hagen has so far done the only research that I can find that has actually talked to trans widows. She asked 20 questions of 61 trans widows who replied to a questionnaire, and she has more women replying all the time. There were 36 children mentioned. Of those, 7 had experienced suicidal ideation. 4 of those children had been hospitalised following suicide attempts. In each case, the father had refused to attend therapy. And actually, in none of those cases did he come to the hospital. We urgently need better, more balanced research because the numbers of children of trans parents is clearly increasing. So much so that there are several books designed to normalise the idea of the trans parent. It might be worth noting here that the European Court of Human Rights and the UK Supreme Court have upheld that it violates a child's human rights and well-being to deny their right to name their parents as mother and father. These are early years books, and there's quite a few, and that's interesting, isn't it? How many kids are we talking about? This book, Nothing Ever Happens, was written by a former Stonewall employee about a girl whose father comes out as trans when she's in her early teens. Bizarrely, the way that she shows her support for her father in the book is by advocating child transition in the media. The father here is particularly weak and sad and grateful when his daughters become his defenders. Possibly the worst book is My Transparent, which is produced by the American organisation Collage, and not allowed to post on their People with Transparent's Facebook page anymore because I mentioned autogynephilia. The book, and this is some collage material here, is really saying that when your parent transitions, you become part of queer culture. And I think we're familiar with this almost parallel LGBTQ plus culture that's emerging. According to the book, autogynephilia has been debunked by Julia Serrano, and people like Janet Mock are your new heroes. It's well funded, but I don't think it's really got anything to do with the welfare of the child. There's a lot of what we call propaganda out there. For a start, there are activist organisations getting transparents in the media in all sorts of contexts. The idea is to normalise the transparent. This particular example is just the picture. This trans father appeared in a news item about rising water prices and described himself as a struggling mother. As a man with a good job, neither of these were true. But during the filmed segment, people spotted he was washing a breast pump. So, of course, no one likes trolling feminists quite like a trans activist. So this is what appeared next on social media. It made it into the press, and there was even an open letter, because there's some controversy, of support signed by 200 feminists and mums for Mika here. Before this, there are only a few public examples of men lactating to feed babies, the most famous of which is Normal Naomi in the US. He's a stepfather, calls himself a sort of human cow, and at one point boasted about being in the top 5% of content providers on OnlyFans. The publicity that about Mika prompted us to write to various hospital groups in the UK, what we call NHS trusts, asking for information on what they were doing to help these men induce lactation to give this fluid to children. None of the trusts which responded said they'd actually helped a man lactate, but we did receive a letter from one trust which said that the fluid these men produced was as healthy as mother's milk. Citing some papers, it claimed to prove this. However, when we looked at the papers, they were mostly about female partners in lesbian relationships who wanted to co-feed, not about men at all. We gave the letter to the organisation Policy Exchange, who published it, and then sadly the lie went around the world that this was healthy. Unhelpful headlines like these, but the truth is it's not healthy. Domperidone, the drug that men take to induce lactation, is cardiotoxic and has the potential to stop a baby's heart. And even if it wasn't poison, men should not be sticking their nipples into a baby's mouth. Mika even had posts from a few years before going on about how much he liked nipple clamps. Thankfully, NHS England has now stated that all care for children of transitioners must be evidence-based. We also asked the hospital trusts in the UK about what they were doing to follow up on the health of babies born to women on testosterone, and this has been mentioned elsewhere in the conference. There's evidence from East Germany, from PCOS animal studies, that taking higher than normal amounts of testosterone can damage a fetus. The FDA, for example, calls it tetragenic. In the UK, hospital trusts are doing nothing at all, and almost every hospital trust had helped women take high testosterone and have babies. One recent study advised women not to stop taking testosterone through the pregnancy as it may harm their dysphoria, despite acknowledged risks that the babies might want to be born with DSDs. It was seen as intersex phobic to not want a baby with a DSD. The trans lobby has affected a societal amnesia about the reality of cross-dressing fetish in men and the effect of testosterone on the female body in women, in the middle of the actual children, abandoned by organisations and overlooked for the most basic protections. Moving forward, we've got really complex situations here, and professionals need to recognise this and try and clear the ideology out of the room. And we're really different from when you have a trans partner. You know, it's a different kind of loyalty, and it can be exploited and manipulated. The myth of true trans and trans kids is really damaging for us. I'm trying to do this very quickly. Ditch the lanyards. I don't want to see trans flags everywhere, because where can we go that we feel safe? One last thought here. My father is 76 this year. As his cohort ages, we have new challenges such as dementia. Some parents forget they even had a trans identity and are distraught at having a different name and a different body. Help us and professionals handle that without policing pronouns, for example. Finally, I'm in this film. Go and watch it. Search for Lime Soda Films on YouTube. Thank you. Thank you so much, Genspect and Stella, who gave me hours of her time. Thank you so much.